What are your thoughts then about this active conversation right now? Is this the only recourse at the moment to gain more leverage, to hasten an agreement with more strikes?
First of all, I think you always have to look at what your adversary is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
For them, they're not looking to win, they're looking to survive. So there's a difference. What they think is if they can put enough political pressure on this administration,
Mm-hmm.
if they can put enough economic pressure on this administration, they think the U.S. will cave to a weak deal. This is the same playbook Iran has always done. They stall, they start talking, they make you think you're going to get a deal, they throw cold water on it, and all the while, they're strategizing, they're rearming, they're getting ready for the next conflict. Iran was never going to do a deal. They are never going to get rid of their nuclear ambitions. That's their number one priority. Now they've actually found more leverage with the Strait of Hormuz. And so they don't want to go back to what it was pre-war. They now want to have sovereignty over the strait. They want to make sure that they have the threat of nuclear ambition, and they're going to continue to do that. So I think Trump was right to strike yesterday, but the idea of a deal, that's just not in their cards. One of the surprising things that's not talked about, they have excavated 50 of the 69 tunnels that hold missiles. They're rearming. Now, that's not enough. We've weakened Iran tremendously, but it shows you how they think.
Well, so if Iran is never going to make a deal, and the U.S. is now obviously bogged down in the Middle East for some time in the absence of one, are we coming out on the losing side of this, Ambassador?
No, the only option is to win. Trump has to finish what he started. And the key is stop waiting for a deal, finish it. They're very weak. But what you have to do is go after their finances. What has not, and what the administration should do, is go after Russia and China. Russia right now is providing them drones. China says they want this hostility to end, yet they are providing them man pads for air defense systems. They provided satellite imagery so that you can hit our military bases. If you go after those two, they're providing money. If you go after those two, that's going to take away Iran's ability to help. The second thing is you do have to acknowledge Kharg Island is where they get their revenues from. And at some point, that's going to have to be addressed. But what they're doing is they're creating a distraction. You know, what they've said is, well, Israel is hitting Lebanon. No, Israel's hitting Hezbollah, the terrorist regime in Lebanon. The Lebanese people don't like Hezbollah. And so the key is Iran's going to keep making excuses. They're going to keep creating distractions. At the end of the day, they just want to survive. They just want to make it another day.
Well, you just said a lot, and we need to unpack that. So the United States seizes Kharg Island. That would involve troops, as we understand, in an operation that could bring some risk, but would have, the point you're making, a very direct impact on the economy in Iran. When you say go after China and Russia, is that sanctions?
Yes.
Because we find repeatedly that sanctions don't change behavior with these two.
You have to truly hold them accountable. You have to make sure that they feel the pain. You know, and a lot of that is a lot of the oil that China would buy from Iran. They wouldn't pay Iran directly. They'd do it through shadow accounts through the UAE. You have to go to UAE and say, look, we're working well together. You can't keep helping China help Iran. All of these adversarial things, those are the ones you go after. The point is, if you take your money away from Iran, they can't build nuclear production. They can't mine the strait. They can't fund Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. You know, right now, Iran's talking about now starting to hit Israeli boats in the Red Sea. They're not stopping. Their intention is to keep being aggressive so that they can get what they want, which is sanction relief, to unfreeze the assets, and to try and get the country to see them as someone they need to be dealt with.
Well, as if they heard you, Ambassador, the U.S. just announced sanctions on quote-unquote clandestine banking in China linked to Iran, sanctioning some Chinese and Hong Kong-based individuals. So perhaps that would be a start to what you're getting at here. But I want to go back to something else you mentioned, that's Lebanon and Israel's conduct there. Your point is well understood that it's Hezbollah that they're targeting, but obviously there has been a lot of associated collateral damage. And I wonder if you view Israel as now being actually a very complicating factor in the path forward, if Israel's desires and objectives are diverging from ours.
The U.S. partnering with Israel and what they did to really bring Iran to its knees was so important and so helpful for the national security of the U.S., of Israel, and of the West. So very important that that happened. Israel has to defend itself. But think, just since the April ceasefire, what you've had is the Hezbollah has struck northern Israel over 2,000 times with rockets and drones. What country would put up with that? What country would allow that? So it's not that Israel was doing this, it's Hezbollah. So Iran is trying to make this gray by saying, oh, they're hitting Lebanon. This is not the case. Lebanon is not the issue. It is Hezbollah that's the issue. And you can't let this terrorist activity that is associated with Iran continue. And I think that the U.S. and Israel are partners. I think that while Netanyahu and Trump may disagree at times, I think they agree on a lot more than they disagree. And I think at the end of the day, they both have the same end goal. And so I think that partnership stays strong.
It's amazing that we're having this conversation in June of 2026, remembering the no new wars mantra that followed the Trump campaign throughout his reelection. There's amazing analysis from our colleagues at Bloomberg Economics found since taking office last January, President Trump has greenlit at least 14,418 military strikes around the globe. I'm just curious, if you were sitting behind the Resolute desk, would you have started this war?
I think that Trump did the right thing. Iran was the weakest they had ever been. If Trump wouldn't have gotten involved, they just would have gone back to doing what they're doing. Keep in mind, you have to know the ideology of that regime. In 1979, they called the U.S. the Great Satan, and they said death to America. Believe adversaries when they say they want to kill you. I personally was targeted. There was a hitman that was actually paid money on U.S. soil to kill me. They are coming to America to kill Americans. This is a regime that finds that their Messiah is coming, and in the meantime, their struggles are supposed to be real, and they're supposed to cause chaos and brutality and murder in the process. You can't change an ideology like that. So they were going to rebuild. They were going to continue to cause harm. They were going to continue to put national security threats on Americans. Over 1,000 Americans have been injured and killed from Iran. We shouldn't even be allowing one. This had to happen. Now he just has to finish what he started.
So you see the national security justification for this particular excursion, as the president has called it. He also has suggested that once this Iran situation is over, whenever that is, he may turn his sights to Cuba. And I wonder if you see that as urgent, what you would expect the U.S. to do when it comes to Cuba and a regime that clearly is teetering on the brink.
In the U.S. put in their national security strategy to make the Western Hemisphere a priority. I think that you saw that with, extracting Maduro in Venezuela. The Venezuelans are going to see so much progress with that. That was something that needed to happen. They deserve freedom, and they're going to get it. What you're seeing in Cuba is a little bit different, because Cuba doesn't have a Delcy Rodriguez, a number two, that can go and run things. Cuba doesn't have a Machado, a head of an opposition, that can go forward. So I don't think that this administration is going to go militarily into Cuba. I think they're just going to put pressure through sanctions and weigh them down. They already stopped the oil that was going from Venezuela to Cuba. They had Mexico pull back on the oil that was going to Cuba, and now Cuba's feeling the pain. They can only take so much pain. What they're going to want is sanction relief. They're going to want to get the Cuban economy going again. But unfortunately, they're going to have to continue to deal with the people that are leading Cuba right now. That's not going to be an issue. That's not going to be something that they can change.
Yeah, there have been questions about whether we could sustain action in two parts of the world militarily like this, because we have a massive buildup in the Middle East that's standing by to do what you're suggesting, which is to finish the job. If in fact we went pedal to the metal and took the advice of Nikki Haley, how long would it take?
Stop negotiating with them. Okay. That's never going to happen. We've lost time. Go finish what you started. I think within a week to 2 weeks.
Is that right?
They could.
Long before the midterms.
Well, a week to 2 weeks, they could. It would take them the amount of time to extract the nuclear enrichment that they have.
Seize
I think
Karg Island.
You'll have to have special forces there to go and hold Karg Island. Is going to obviously take a little bit longer, but this is one where they need to be focused and mission driven on go after the revenues that are going to Iran, and that's the only way to get rid of the regime. And then The Iranian people have no way to defend themselves. They've killed thousands of people in the streets and made examples of them. What's happened in the past is the U.S. has actually helped countries so that the people can rise up. That's the way that this is going to end, is when the people feel safe enough to rise up, that they can go and take their country back.
If the U.S. were to pursue the course of action you're describing, do you believe it would be prudent for the president to go to Congress first? Do you see that constitutional necessity that he has consistently denied is necessary?
I always think you need to go to Congress. One, you need the buy-in of Congress. You need the buy-in of the American people. You need to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you know. And yes, it's just good practice to go to Congress with more. This administration has done a lot by executive order. The danger in that is the next administration, if it's not a Republican, all of that gets reversed. And then we're swinging the pendulum. That's not good for the American people. Congress needs to step up. There are a lot of things Congress could be doing, but right now we're hearing a lot of talking and not a lot of action.
The political pendulum also swings as we watch the primary season unfold, and there was a state you know a lot about that was, of course, voting yesterday in South Carolina. The president's endorsements have been on the line quite a bit here more recently, and they paid off last evening, particularly in the race for governor, the primary for governor. Pamela, Yvette, I'm curious your thoughts on this and what it looks to be the end of a couple of political careers, including Nancy Mace and someone who you endorsed and endorsed you back in Ralph Norman. What transpired last night, and is it good for your party?
Well, I think, first of all, primaries are always good for our party. I think that it's very important that you have debate, that you have, them touching as many hands as they can and really getting their message out. So I think having a full primary was a great thing. The press has been covering that Nancy Mace was a factor, and because of the Trump endorsement, she lost. She was never a factor in this race.
Wow.
She was always in fifth place. She was never going anywhere.
That was a tough
She
finish.
knew that, and South Carolina knew that. So, she laid her bed. She's now laying in it. That's what she's doing. Ralph Norman, who I respect and love, we go way back. He does what he says he's going to do. He's got real clarity. Certainly I wish he would have made it into the runoff, but he was always pushing, and then you had Evett and Wilson in there. And so, look, it's the power of the Trump endorsement. Evett wouldn't have made it in the runoff without the Trump endorsement. So his endorsement is strong. It does move the ball. And, we just have to make sure that who we elect in a primary is who we want to vote for in a general.
Well, and to that point, I wonder if you think the president is making the correct endorsement choices, even if we look beyond South Carolina to say somewhere like Texas, where Ken Paxton is now the one who is going to have to try to hold a Senate seat in Republican hands.
It's going to cost a lot more money for Republicans to hold that seat. I do think we'll hold the Texas seat, but it's just not Republicans. Look at Graham Plattner in Maine. It's amazing to me. I always say it's important to understand that in a primary, you make your choice. In a general election, you're given the choice. You have to choose between the two. But in America, typically only 15% of Americans vote in a primary. So what you're getting is the extreme of both sides. So by the time most Americans go to vote, they're having to choose between two extremes. It's because we don't talk about primaries in high schools. Our kids don't know that. They know to vote in November. They know to do that, and they do. But until we start talking about the importance of primaries, and until Americans see that that's actually the race that matters, you're going to have the Paxton race, you're going to have the Plattners, you're going to have those that make us kind of uncomfortable. But, all in the name of getting a majority, let's get the right, good people in there so that we can start getting things done. But more than that, let's look at what's not getting done. You look at the debt that America has right now. What has Congress done about that? So you want to talk about a war, but why aren't they talking about balancing a budget? We're $39 trillion in debt. We're going to be $40 trillion in the fall. That's unacceptable. That's like the U.S. taking in $5 trillion a year and spending $7 trillion a year. Now we're 100% over GDP. The last two recessions, we had a buffer. If we have another recession, there will be no stimulus. There will be no tax breaks. You aren't going to have a cushion to do anything with. That is something Congress can address now, and they've yet to do it. Social Security is going to run out in 6 years. every U.S. Senate candidate needs to be asked, what are you going to do about it? Because 75 million Americans will be affected by that. You don't wait until that falls on us and do a quick Band-Aid of a deal. It's something I talked about in the campaign, was reforming entitlements. You have to do that. In a few years, 15% of our federal outlays are going to be interest. That's not okay.
Well, I'm just listening to you speak, Ambassador, and I'm wondering if you plan to travel to campaign for candidates that you decide to support, whether it's in the South Carolina runoff or nationally, and what your plans are beyond this midterm cycle. We all remember when you said your time would come. Is it coming in this next round?
First of all, I'm going to help any candidates that I can. You know, we have been helping Susan Collins raise money. I plan on going to Maine and campaigning for her, doing that. When we see a good candidate, I mean, that race matters to us so much. And she's been such a remarkable senator. You know, it shouldn't go overseen that she's never missed a vote. Never missed a vote. And regardless of where her views are, she's respected, she's a hard worker, she's come out of tough races, but we need to make sure she wins again. We can't take this for granted. So yes, I will be out there in elections helping Republicans. That's something I'm always going to do. In terms of my future, you know, I'm going to keep talking about the things that matter. I'm going to talk about foreign policy. I'm going to talk about the debt. I'm going to talk about the need for us to self-correct. I think that's what I can do. You know, I talk to a lot of business leaders now about how you manage business in, you know, this world that we're in, and that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not going to look forward. I'm not running in 2028. That's not something that I'm interested in, but my voice is going to always be there. I think it's too important for us to stay silent in times like this.
Well, and as you talking about foreign policy, something that you were vocal about in 2024, President Trump, as Joe alluded to earlier, was very much not running that kind of campaign, and yet he does seem to be running that kind of presidency, much more foreign policy oriented. And I wonder if you expect that trajectory is going to continue, where that once again is back at the forefront of conversation.
Well, I think, you know, you can say no new wars, but the reality of Ukraine and Russia is there. Russia invaded a free country. That's something that we can't step away from. The reality of the threat from Iran on our national security, you can't walk away from that. So, yes, in a campaign you can say no new wars, but reality hits you in the face when you get to that leadership position and you have to make those decisions. And I think he's having to make those decisions now.
It's a pretty dangerous time that we're living in and talking through with you, Ambassador. And there's a big question about who should be running the nation's intelligence apparatus. This is a big problem on Capitol Hill. FISA expires, it looks like, on Friday because lawmakers need more than Bill Pulte. They want a permanent name that the president might announce. He says he's working on one, but Pulte will be on the job later this month. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, I think Trump has made it clear that he's going to put a permanent person in there. That person needs to have experience. Our intelligence is everything. I can tell you from when I was at the United Nations, the profiles of our adversaries, knowing what they're saying, knowing what they're doing, knowing the threats that face us are hugely important. It would be irresponsible for Congress not to renew FISA. I can't stress enough how that keeps Americans safe. And regardless of what you think about Pulte, FISA needs to continue, and Trump needs to put someone qualified in there that can make Congress feel like they can move forward. So both of those things need to happen.
Just quickly, is it also irresponsible to have someone even in an acting capacity who's used non-public mortgage data to go after perceived enemies of the president?
I think that what we want is transparency. Let us know who's serving us. What are they doing for us? Be transparent about it, and what's your end goal? I think that there are, cabinet members who are doing a great job. I think there are other cabinet members who we may not know as much of what they're doing. Open it all up. Let the American people see. At the end of the day, Americans want to know that government's working for them. They still don't trust government. They don't trust our agencies. They don't trust Congress. They don't trust elected officials. Americans deserve better. They're paying higher in groceries, higher in energy, higher in insurance, all of these things. Kids can't afford their rent. If all of that's going to happen, it makes an American public more resentful, and it makes them more angry at why people aren't working for them. And my advice is, look, we're going to be okay, but do your part. Step up. Don't vote for somebody because they look good in a picture or hold a baby well. You know, are they fighting for you? And if they're fighting for you, fight for them. But if they're not, it's time to turn the leaf and get someone else.